I pressed my trembling hands into the silk suits hanging in King Decimus's private office closet, desperately trying to silence my sobs against fabrics worth more than my entire life savings, when the air dropped into that unnatural cold that always announced his presence. A heartbeat later, the heavy mahogany door swung open without a single creak, and a wash of moonlight from his towering windows spilled across me, leaving my tear-streaked face exposed in a glow I had no strength to hide from. Standing there in the doorway, with the absolute stillness that only the truly immortal could achieve, was Decimus Cato himself, the ancient vampire king who had ruled the supernatural underworld of New Orleans for over 800 years, crimson eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, dressed in his signature black velvet jacket, his expression shifting from that familiar predatory alertness to something I'd never witnessed before, genuine, unfiltered concern. For 8 months, I had maintained the perfect facade of the efficient, unshakable secretary. The woman who never flinched when blood-stained vampires materialized through shadows in our office. Who never asked questions about the territorial disputes that left bodies drained in the French Quarter. Or the hushed conversations about blood tributes and ancient covenants. Who kept my eyes down and my pulse steady even when my boss's dangerous, immortal world crashed against the fragile boundaries of my mortal existence like violent waves against paper-thin glass. I had been so careful, so meticulously professional, organizing his eternal empire with color-coded files and perfectly timed reminders, keeping my forbidden attraction to him buried so deep beneath layers of business casual and polite distance that I sometimes almost convinced myself it didn't exist at all, that I wasn't falling desperately in love with a creature who could kill me with less effort than it took to breathe. But now, everything was crumbling around me like ash in a hurricane. And the one person I never wanted to see me broken, the immortal king whose very presence sucked the warmth from the room, was staring at me with an intensity that made my already racing heart threaten to burst right through my rib cage, his fangs barely visible as his lips parted, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper. "Julie, who has harmed you? Give me their name, and I will ensure they beg for the mercy of sunrise before I'm through with them." The words tumbled out of me in broken, gasping fragments that I couldn't control anymore, 8 months of careful composure shattering like glass against stone. "They have Donna. The Crimson Court took her 3 hours ago from her dorm room, and Lord Cassius sent me this." My hands shook violently as I pulled out my phone, showing him the video that had destroyed me. My baby sister, terrified and compelled into silence, chains glowing with supernatural binding around her wrists. "He says I have something he wants. My blood. He called it Daywalker lineage, said it's been hidden in my family for generations, and if I don't surrender myself to him by dawn tomorrow, he'll turn her into his personal blood slave for eternity." The temperature in the closet plummeted so drastically that my breath crystallized in the air between us. Decimus's crimson eyes blazed with something far more terrifying than anger, something ancient and absolute that made every survival instinct I possess scream at me to run. But he didn't move toward me with violence. Instead, his pale hand came up slowly, almost reverently, and wiped a tear from my cheek with his cold thumb, the gesture so unexpectedly gentle that it broke something else inside me. "How long have you carried this alone?" His voice was dangerously soft. "Since 6 o'clock. His jaw clenched, fangs fully visible now, and then he moved with that impossible vampire speed that always stole my breath. The office doors burst open and his presence filled the room like a physical force as he commanded into the darkness, "Summon the council. All of them. Now." 3 shadows detached from the walls, vampires I hadn't even known were there, and vanished. He turned back to me, and his next words were a vow that resonated with 8 centuries of absolute power. "We ride against the Crimson Court tonight." He stepped closer, his cold hand tilting my chin up until I couldn't look away from those burning eyes. "You are under my protection now, Julie Cooper. No one harms what belongs to the king." Decimus didn't give me time to process what he'd just declared before his hand wrapped around mine with surprising gentleness, pulling me from the closet through his office and down a corridor I'd never been permitted to enter in 8 months of employment. The hallway was lined with portraits of people I assumed were long dead, their painted eyes seeming to follow us as we moved deeper into the fortress, past ancient tapestries and weapons that had probably tasted centuries of blood. He stopped before massive double doors carved with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with their own dark energy, and when they swung open at his touch, I found myself standing in chambers that were somehow both terrifying and breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the moonlit French Quarter, heavy velvet curtains the color of fresh blood framing glass, so thick it had to be reinforced. The room itself was decorated in dark woods and deep crimsons, a massive four-poster bed dominating one side, ancient books lining shelves on another, and what looked like priceless artifacts scattered throughout like casual decorations. This was the private sanctuary of an immortal king, and he'd just brought his mortal secretary inside. "You'll stay here until this is resolved," Decimus said, his voice leaving no room for argument as he moved to a mahogany bar and poured himself something dark and thick from a crystal decanter that I tried very hard not to think about. "Cassius has been watching you for months, Julie, waiting for the perfect moment to exploit what you are." My blood ran cold. What I am? I don't understand any of this. I'm nobody. I file your paperwork and answer your phones and... You are a daywalker. He turned to face me fully, his crimson eyes holding mine with an intensity that made it impossible to breathe. A human whose blood carries ancient vampire lineage, dormant but extraordinarily rare. I've known since the moment you walked into my office for your interview 8 months ago. Your scent alone told me everything I needed to know. He set down his glass with deliberate control. I've been shielding you from every supernatural creature in this city who would kill to possess you, Julie. Cassius timed this kidnapping to undermine my authority, to force my hand, to prove to the vampire world that I'm weak enough to let someone under my protection be threatened. The words hit me like physical blows. You knew? This entire time, you knew what I was and you never. My voice broke. You've been protecting me? Every single day. He crossed the distance between us in 2 measured steps, and suddenly his cold hands were framing my face with a possessive reverence that made my traitorous heart race. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You are no longer merely my secretary. You are under my blood protection now, Julie Cooper. A sacred bond in vampire law. An oath I make before my entire court. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, his voice dropping to something raw and ancient. You belong to me now, and I will burn the Crimson Court to ash before I let Cassius Thorne lay one finger on what is mine. The crimson silk dress Decimus had provided clung to my body like a second skin, far more revealing than anything I'd ever worn in my life, and I knew that was precisely the point. When his attendants had brought it to his chambers an hour before the meeting, along with instructions to dress me and style my hair in elaborate braids woven with blood rubies, I'd understood the message he was sending to Cassius Thorne. Julie Cooper belonged to the Vampire King, and everyone would know it. Now I sat beside Decimus's throne in the vast neutral chamber that served as supernatural Switzerland, an abandoned cathedral that both courts had agreed upon, my hand resting on the carved armrest where his pale fingers occasionally brushed mine in silent reassurance. The space was filled with witnesses from both factions, vampires who watched with predatory interest as Lord Cassius Thorne entered through the massive doors with an entourage that reeked of violence and old blood. Cassius was everything Decimus was not. Dark where Decimus was light, brutal where Decimus was calculated, his smile cruel and his movements aggressive as he approached the center of the cathedral floor. He was younger than Decimus by several centuries, but ambition burned in his black eyes like hellfire, and when those eyes landed on me, I felt violated in a way that made my skin crawl. "King Decimus," Cassius said with mock formality, his voice echoing through the sacred space. How lovely that you've brought your little secretary to our negotiation. I see you've dressed her appropriately, like a gift. Decimus's hand moved to my thigh in a gesture so possessive and territorial that several vampires in the room actually hissed. State your terms, Thorn. My patience has limits, and you've already exceeded most of them. Cassius smiled, and with a casual wave of his hand, one of his followers projected an image into the air between us using blood magic so powerful it made the temperature spike. My heart stopped. Donna appeared before us, life-sized and terrifyingly real, chained to a stone wall in what looked like a dungeon, her eyes glazed with compulsion, tears streaming down her face, her wrists raw and bleeding where she'd clearly tried to escape.
Donna.
The scream tore from my throat before I could stop it, and I lurched forward, only to be held in place by Decimus's iron grip on my waist. She's quite comfortable, I assure you, Cassius said conversationally, studying his nails. Fed twice a day. Compelled to stop screaming after the first few hours. Very well behaved now. His black eyes snapped to Decimus. My terms are simple. 3 territories, the Garden District, the Warehouse Quarter, and the Port. Complete non-interference in my operations for the next decade. And Julie Cooper's willing submission to a blood bond with me for 1 century. After which, I'll return her to you, somewhat used, but still alive. The temperature in the cathedral plummeted so drastically that frost began forming on the ancient stone walls. Shadows that shouldn't exist in candlelight began writhing and twisting around Decimus's throne like living creatures, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 800 years of absolute dominion, every syllable dripping with lethal promise. You dare. It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence. You dare walk into neutral ground and demand that I surrender my territories, my authority, and His hand tightened on my waist, pulling me impossibly closer. My blood claimed to a mongrel who hasn't earned the right to speak her name, let alone touch her. Decimus rose from his throne with terrifying grace, and every vampire in the room took an instinctive step backward. I reject your terms, Cassius Thorn. I declare your actions an act of war against the crown. And I promise you this, before the next full moon rises, your court will be ash, your followers will be dust, and your name will be a cautionary tale whispered in fear for the next 1,000 years. Decimus didn't speak as he pulled me through a hidden door behind the cathedral's altar, his grip on my wrist almost painful in its intensity, his movement sharp and controlled in a way that told me he was barely holding himself together. The private chamber we entered was small and dark, lit only by a single candle that cast violent shadows across his face as he finally released me and turned away, his hands bracing against the ancient stone wall. 1 century. His voice was raw, broken in a way I'd never heard from him before. He asked for 1 century of you, Julie. Do you understand what that means? What he would do to you in that time? He spun to face me, and his crimson eyes were blazing with something that looked like actual pain. He would drain you to the edge of death every single night and force you to heal, so he could do it again. He would bind you with compulsion, so complete you wouldn't remember your own name. He would. His voice cracked, and he looked away, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jumping. I've lived 800 years, and I have never wanted to tear someone apart with my bare hands the way I want to destroy him for even speaking those words. I crossed to him without thinking, my hands finding his cold face, forcing him to look at me. Then destroy him. Start the war. Do whatever you have to do. War will take months, he said, his voice dropping to something desperate and furious. Donna doesn't have months. She has days, maybe hours before Cassius does something irreversible out of spite. His hands came up to cover mine, holding them against his face like a lifeline. There is one other option. An ancient law that even Cassius cannot refuse without losing the support of every vampire in existence. Tell me, the sanguine duel. He said the words like they tasted of ash. A fight where both combatants are bound by sacred magic that suppresses all vampire powers. No supernatural strength, no speed, no healing, no compulsion. We fight as mortals would fight, with nothing but skill and strategy and will, but the consequences remain immortal. Winner takes all. Loser dies a true death. My heart stopped. You mean you could actually die? Yes. The single word hung between us like a blade. If he's faster than me, stronger than me in that moment, better trained in mortal combat than 8 centuries have made me, then yes, I die, and you become his. His hands tightened on mine. But if I win, the terms are absolute and witnessed by the Vampire Council. Donna goes free immediately, unharmed, and with her memory compelled to forget this nightmare. The Crimson Court disbands. Cassius's territories become mine, and his claim on you is voided forever. I stared at him, my mind racing through the impossible mathematics of this choice. War that could take months and leave Donna broken or dead. Or a duel that could end this in one night but risk losing Decimus forever. Risk becoming Cassius's property for a century of torture I couldn't even imagine. How long do we have to decide? I whispered. The duel must take place within 3 nights of the challenge being issued. 3 nights for both fighters to prepare, to train without their powers, to remember what it means to be vulnerable. His thumb traced my lower lip with devastating gentleness. 3 nights for me to memorize every moment I have left with you, in case those are the last nights I ever see you alive and free. The words came out of me with absolute certainty, even as tears streamed down my face. Challenge him. Invoke the sanguine duel. Save my sister. I pulled his face down to mine, our foreheads touching, my voice breaking on the promise that would bind us forever. If you survive this, Decimus Cato, if you win and come back to me, I'm yours. Not as your secretary, not as someone under your protection, but as yours. Eternally. Completely. Whatever that means in your world, whatever transformation or bond or blood price it requires, I'll pay it. Because I can't lose you, and I can't lose Donna, and this is the only way we get to keep both. His lips crashed against mine with 800 years of desperate hunger, and I tasted blood and eternity and a love so fierce it felt like dying and being reborn in the same devastating moment. I found him on the balcony of his private chambers just past midnight, his platinum hair stirring in the wind that carried the scent of magnolia and river water from the French Quarter below. He stood motionless as a statue, hands gripping the iron railing, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the city lights, something only he could see across the vast expanse of his immortal memory. I'd barely slept since we'd returned from the cathedral, my mind replaying Donna's terrified face and Decimus's devastating kiss in equal, torturous measure. You should be resting, he said without turning, his preternatural senses detecting my presence before I'd even stepped fully outside. Tomorrow begins my training. I can't rest. I moved to stand beside him, close enough that the supernatural cold radiating from his body made me shiver. Not when I keep thinking about what you're risking for us. For me. His jaw tightened. I'm risking nothing I'm not willing to lose. Liar. The word came out softer than I intended, and finally, he turned to look at me, those crimson eyes unreadable in the moonlight. Talk to me, Decimus. Tell me why you've been alone for 800 years. Tell me why you've never taken a queen, never bound yourself to anyone, never let anyone close until now. For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came, low and devastated. Because the last time I loved mortals, the last time I protected my own, they were slaughtered in front of me by someone I trusted. My human family before I was turned, my wife, my daughter, taken by a man I'd called brother, used as leverage to force my sire to turn me into this. He gestured to himself with bitter disgust. I spent 2 centuries hunting him, and when I finally ended him, I swore I would never again give anyone the power to destroy me through those I loved. Isolation became my armor. Ruthlessness became my protection. For 8 centuries, I've ruled absolutely and loved nothing. Tears burned my eyes. Until now. Until you walked into my office 8 months ago and made me remember what it felt like to want something beyond power. He turned fully to face me, his cold hands cupping my face with heartbreaking tenderness. You terrify me, Julie Cooper, because for the first time in 800 years, I have something to lose. The confession broke something open inside me. I've fallen completely and impossibly in love with you, Decimus. Mortal heart and all. Foolish and vulnerable and absolutely certain. If you don't survive that duel, I don't know how I'll survive what comes after. His eyes blazed crimson fire, and then his lips were on mine, fierce and reverent and desperate all at once. When he pulled back, his voice was a sacred vow that resonated with ancient power. When this is over, when I've ended Cassius and freed your sister, I will make you my eternal queen. No more hiding, no more fear. You will be mine in every way that matters, bound by blood and immortality and a love that will outlast empires. He drew a ceremonial blade from his jacket and with deliberate precision made a small cut across his palm. This is the first blood promise, Julie. Drink and the bond begins. Drink, and you mark yourself as mine before all of vampire kind. I didn't hesitate. I pressed my lips to his palm, and the taste of his ancient blood was copper and power and eternity itself, burning down my throat like liquid fire, marking me forever as the vampire king's beloved. The third night arrived with the weight of inevitability, and I found Decimus in his preparation chamber, stripped to the waist, his pale skin marked with bruises and cuts that should have healed instantly, but hadn't because of the suppression magic already beginning to take effect in preparation for the duel. He'd been training for 3 days without his vampire powers, relearning the limitations of a mortal body, and the evidence of that brutal education was written across every inch of him. "Let me help," I said softly, carrying the basin of water and clean cloth his attendant had left outside the door. He didn't protest as I began carefully cleaning the wound across his ribs where his sparring partner's blade had cut too deep, my hands trembling slightly as I worked. Without his supernatural healing, he was just flesh and bone, and the muscle memory of 800 years of survival. "I need you to promise me something," he said quietly, his crimson eyes watching my face with an intensity that made my chest ache. "If tonight goes wrong, if Cassius proves faster or luckier or more desperate than I anticipate, I need you to promise you'll let Marcus protect you and Donna." Marcus was his second in command, a vampire nearly as old as Decimus himself, loyal to a fault. "Don't," I whispered, pressing the cloth perhaps harder than necessary against his wound. "Don't talk like you're already planning your funeral. I'm planning for every contingency, which is what 8 centuries of ruling has taught me to do." His hand caught mine, stilling my movements. "Julie, listen to me. If I fall tonight, Marcus has orders to get you and Donna out of New Orleans before Cassius can claim you. He has safe houses across 3 continents, resources that will last you both a lifetime, and a blood oath to protect you, as he would protect me. I don't want Marcus's protection." My voice broke on the words. "I don't want safe houses or resources, or a lifetime running from Cassius's claim. I want you. I want the eternity you promised me on that balcony. I want to wake up immortal beside you and learn what it means to be a vampire queen and watch centuries pass while we're together." Tears streamed down my face as I abandoned the cloth and pressed both palms against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his ancient heart. "You don't get to plan for failure, Decimus Cato. You don't get to die and leave me behind after making me fall in love with you, after making me taste your blood and promise myself to you for eternity." His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs wiping away my tears with devastating gentleness. Then I need you to understand what I'm fighting for tonight. I'm not just fighting for your sister's freedom or my territories or my pride as king. I'm fighting for the right to keep you, to transform you, to bind you to me so completely that death itself couldn't separate us. His voice dropped to something raw and ancient. I'm fighting for 800 years of loneliness to finally end, for the chance to love someone again without fear, for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I deserve the gift you're offering me. You've survived 800 years, I said fiercely, my fingers curling into his skin. You've outlasted empires and enemies and every vampire who ever challenged you. You'll survive this too. Not because you're the strongest or the fastest or the most powerful, but because you have something Cassius doesn't have. You have something worth living for. You have us. You have the future we're going to build together. You have me, and I refuse to accept any reality where you don't come back to me tonight. His kiss was desperate and eternal, and tasted like goodbye and forever all at once, his cold lips moving against mine with 800 years of loneliness finally breaking open into something that felt like hope. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his breath unnecessary but offered anyway, a ghost of humanity he'd maintained just for this moment. Then I'll come back to you, he whispered against my lips. I swear it on my immortal soul. I'll come back to you, and I'll make you my queen, and we'll have the eternity we both deserve. The ancient dueling ground was located in the depths of the Louisiana Bayou, far from mortal eyes, a circular stone arena that had witnessed centuries of vampire conflicts and bore the stains of immortal blood in its weathered surface. Torches ringed the space, casting violent shadows across the assembled witnesses. Vampires from both courts, the neutral council members who would enforce the sacred laws, and in the center of it all, two thrones positioned for the combatants to face each other before the ritual began. I stood with Marcus at the edge of the arena, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst as I watched Decimus enter the circle. He was dressed in simple black, no armor or protection beyond his own skill, and when the council's elder approached with the ceremonial chains, I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. The chains glowed with ancient magic as they were wrapped around his wrists, each link inscribed with symbols that pulsed with power-suppressing enchantments. I could see the exact moment they took effect. Decimus's eyes dimmed slightly, losing that supernatural glow, his movements becoming infinitesimally more human, more vulnerable. Cassius entered from the opposite side, similarly bound, though his expression was one of cruel confidence. He caught my eye across the arena and smiled in a way that made my skin crawl, mouthing words I couldn't hear but could easily interpret. Mine. The council elder raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. This sanguine duel is witnessed and sanctioned under the oldest laws of our kind. The terms: if King Decimus Cato claims victory, Donna Cooper will be freed unharmed with compelled amnesia, the Crimson Court will disband, and all claims on Julie Cooper are voided. If Lord Cassius Thorne claims victory, he receives the disputed territories, and Julie Cooper will be bound to him for 1 century. The elder's ancient eyes swept the crowd. Both combatants fight as mortals would fight. All vampire abilities are suppressed. Only one will leave this arena alive. Cassius stepped forward, his voice carrying across the space with theatrical malice. I'm going to enjoy breaking you, old king. I'm going to enjoy watching you bleed and weaken and realize that your 800 years of experience mean nothing when you're fighting with a mortal's limitations. And when you're dead, I'm going to take such exquisite pleasure in teaching your little secretary what it means to belong to someone who isn't afraid to truly possess her. Decimus's response was cold as winter frost. You'll be ash before dawn, Thorne. Your bloodline ends tonight. Your ambitions die with you. And Julie will become my queen, just as I promised her. That's not a threat. That's prophecy. The elder dropped his hand, and the duel began. They moved with brutal efficiency, both stripped of supernatural speed but guided by centuries and decades of combat training respectively. Cassius attacked first, aggressive and wild, his blade flashing in the torchlight as Decimus deflected with calculated precision. The sound of metal on metal rang through the bayou, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't look away, couldn't do anything but watch as the two vampires fought like the mortal warriors they'd once been. Decimus was methodical, conserving energy, letting Cassius exhaust himself with showy attacks while looking for openings with the patience of someone who'd fought thousands of battles. But Cassius was younger, more desperate, and when his blade found its mark across Decimus's shoulder, drawing blood that didn't heal instantly, I heard myself gasp. "First blood," Cassius crowed, circling like a predator. "How does it feel, King? To bleed like the mortals you rule over?" Decimus didn't respond with words. He responded with violence, a calculated series of strikes that drove Cassius backward, his superior experience finally showing through as he forced the younger vampire into defensive positions. His wounded shoulder didn't slow him, centuries of pain tolerance making him relentless even as blood stained his shirt. The fight intensified, both combatants now bleeding, both showing the effects of mortal exhaustion, and I realized with dawning horror that this could go either way. The psychic intrusion hit my mind like a spike of ice, foreign and violating, a vampire's compulsion forcing its way through my thoughts despite the blood protection Decimus had given me. The voice was female, unfamiliar and terrified. He ordered her death. Cassius gave the command before he entered the arena. "Win or lose. Your sister dies at midnight. They're moving her now."
"I'm sorry."
"I'm so sorry, Marcus." I grabbed his arm with desperate strength, my voice barely a whisper but urgent enough that his ancient instincts responded immediately.
"Donna."
Cassius ordered her execution regardless of the outcome. "They're moving her right now." His eyes flared crimson, and I saw the terrible calculation cross his face. Stay and protect me as ordered, or save Donna and leave me vulnerable. "How do you know this?" "Someone in his court just sent me a psychic message." "Marcus, please, you have to go. You have to save her. I'll be fine here. The council is watching. It's sacred ground. Please." He looked toward the arena, where Decimus was still fighting, then back to me, centuries of loyalty warring with tactical necessity. "If I leave and something happens to you, he'll destroy me. If you stay and Donna dies, I'll never forgive either of us."
"Go. Now."
Marcus vanished into shadow, taking 3 of Decimus's personal guard with him, and suddenly the protective circle around me felt dangerously thin. I turned back to the fight, my heart in my throat, trying to catch Decimus's eye to warn him, but he was completely focused on Cassius, driving him backward with relentless precision. Then I saw it happen. Decimus's blade found its opening, a perfect strike that sent Cassius's weapon flying across the arena, and in the next heartbeat Decimus had him pinned to the ground, his blade pressed against Cassius's throat, victory so close I could taste it. "Yield," Decimus commanded, his voice carrying the weight of 8 centuries of dominion even without his supernatural power behind it. "Yield and accept your execution with whatever dignity you have left." Cassius smiled through bloody teeth. "I don't think so." Movement in the shadows behind Decimus caught my eye, and time seemed to slow to a horrifying crawl. A figure emerged from the darkness at the arena's edge, one of Cassius's lieutenants, his hands wrapped around a silver stake that gleamed with lethal intent, moving with impossible stealth toward Decimus's unprotected back. The council members were too far away, too focused on the official combatants, and in his mortal state Decimus wouldn't sense the attack until it was too late. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I didn't consider the consequences or the sacred laws or the fact that I was a mortal human in an arena full of vampires who could tear me apart for interfering. I saw the ceremonial silver dagger on the witness table beside me, placed there as part of the ritual but never meant to be used, and my hand closed around its handle with absolute certainty. The lieutenant was 3 steps from Decimus, the silver stake raised high for a killing blow, when I moved. I was across that space faster than I'd ever moved in my life, driven by love and terror and the absolute refusal to lose the man who'd promised me eternity. The lieutenant's eyes widened as he saw me coming, but he was committed to his attack, his focus on Decimus, and that half-second of divided attention was all I needed. I drove the ceremonial dagger into his chest with every ounce of strength I possessed, aiming for the heart the way I'd seen in countless movies, the way instinct and desperation guided me. The blade slid through cloth and flesh and found its mark, and the lieutenant's eyes went wide with shock and disbelief as silver poisoning began racing through his undead system. He crumpled to the ground, true death claiming him in seconds, and the entire arena fell into stunned, absolute silence. I stood there, the bloody dagger still in my shaking hand, chest heaving, and slowly turned to face the assembled vampires. Every eye was on me. Every predatory instinct in that arena was suddenly focused on the mortal human who had just killed a vampire during a sacred sanguine duel. The council elder's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The mortal has intervened. This is unprecedented. Decimus was on his feet now, Cassius still pinned beneath his blade but forgotten, his eyes locked on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, pride, terror, and something that looked like absolute devotion all warring across his face. She acted in defense of the king, another council member stated, their ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries of vampire law. The lieutenant's attack violated the terms of honorable combat. The mortal's intervention, while irregular, falls under the protection clause. She cannot be punished for defending her blood claimed. Cassius started to laugh from the ground, the sound bitter and defeated. Killed by proxy. How fitting. Your little secretary has more spine than I gave her credit for, old king. Decimus's blade pressed deeper against his throat. Any last words? Enjoy your century together. I hope she was worth it. The blade finished what it had started, and Lord Cassius Thorne, leader of the Crimson Court, met his final death on the blood-stained stones of the ancient arena. The council elder stepped forward, his ancient voice resonating with absolute authority. King Decimus Cato is declared victor of the sanguine duel. The terms are binding and witnessed. The Crimson Court is hereby disbanded, their territories forfeit to the crown, and all claims on Julie Cooper are voided in perpetuity. He turned his penetrating gaze to the remaining members of Cassius's faction. Any who wish to challenge this ruling may step forward now. Silence. Not a single vampire moved. At that moment, Marcus materialized at the arena's edge, and cradled carefully in his arms was Donna, unconscious but breathing, her wrists no longer bound, the compulsion marks already fading from her temples. She's safe, my king. We arrived just as they were preparing to carry out Cassius's final order. The perpetrators have been dealt with. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I nearly collapsed, but then Decimus was there, crossing the arena in 3 strides despite his mortal exhaustion, his wounded body, the blood that still stained his clothes. His arms wrapped around me with desperate strength, and I felt him trembling against me, this ancient immortal king who had just fought for his life and won. You saved me, he whispered against my hair, his voice raw with emotion that 800 years of isolation had never taught him how to process. My brave, mortal Julie struck down a vampire to save me. You crossed every line, broke every rule of your human world, took a life with your own hands because you refused to lose me. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his crimson eyes blazing with fierce devotion. You were born to be a queen, not because of your bloodline or your rare genetics, but because you have the heart of a warrior and the courage to fight for what's yours. And I am yours, Julie Cooper, completely and eternally yours. His lips found mine in a kiss that tasted of blood and victory and promises kept, and I didn't care that hundreds of vampires were watching, didn't care that I was still holding a bloody dagger, didn't care about anything except the fact that he was alive and we had won and Donna was safe. The journey back to the fortress was a blur of vampire speed and whispered reassurances. Decimus's supernatural powers had returned the moment the ceremonial chains were removed, and he'd insisted on carrying both me and Donna himself, refusing to let either of us out of his sight. By the time we arrived, Donna was beginning to wake, her eyes unfocused and confused as the compulsion slowly released its hold on her memories. "Julie?" Her voice was small and frightened, and I was at her side instantly, holding her hand while the fortress's healers worked to ease her transition back to consciousness. "What happened? Where are we?" I remember being scared, and then nothing. "You're safe now," I promised, smoothing her hair back from her face. "You're safe, and you're going to be fine, and I swear on everything I have that nothing like this will ever happen to you again." She looked past me to where Decimus stood watching from the doorway, his presence commanding even in his blood-stained clothes, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, or instinctive understanding. "He saved me, didn't he? The Vampire King saved me for you." "He did," I whispered. "He risked everything for you. For us." Donna's hand squeezed mine, and despite her trauma, despite everything she'd endured, she managed a weak smile. "Then I guess you should probably marry him or something. Seems like the least you could do after he went to war for your little sister." 6 months later, I stood in the throne room of Decimus's fortress, wearing a gown the color of fresh rose, my reflection in the ancient mirrors showing a woman I barely recognized, immortal, powerful, transformed. The change had been completed 3 months ago in a ceremony that had been both terrifying and transcendent, Decimus's ancient blood remaking me cell by cell until I emerged as something new, something eternal. My hand rested on the subtle swell of my stomach, still barely visible, but impossible to hide from vampire senses. A damper child, the healers had confirmed with wonder, the first to be born to Decimus's line in 8 centuries. Half vampire, half the mortal humanity I'd once been, and entirely ours. Donna sat in the scholar section of the Great Hall, healthy and whole, and thriving under the protection of the crown, her natural curiosity about the supernatural world channeled into academic study that made her one of the youngest supernatural historians in the city. She caught my eye and grinned, giving me an enthusiastic thumbs up that made several ancient vampires turn to look at her with bemused expressions. Decimus's hand found mine, his cold fingers intertwining with my own as he led me to the throne that had been placed beside his. No longer a secretary's desk in the corner, but a queen's seat of equal power. "Any regrets?" he murmured, his crimson eyes searching mine with that vulnerability he only ever showed me. I thought about that night in his closet, sobbing and terrified and convinced I'd lost everything. I thought about the impossible choice, the deadly duel, the moment I'd driven a silver dagger into a vampire's heart and crossed the line between mortal and monster. I thought about 8 months of carefully constructed professional distance that had shattered in one devastating night of truth. "Not a single one," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my immortal being. "You promised me eternity, and you delivered. You promised me family, and here we are. You promised you'd burn the world for me, and I watched you risk everything to prove it." I lifted our joined hands to my lips, pressing a kiss to his pale knuckles. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, forever bound to the Vampire King who made me a queen. His smile was radiant and rare and absolutely devastating, and when he kissed me in front of the assembled court, it tasted like coming home after 800 years of searching. The worst night of my mortal life had given me an eternity of immortal love, and I wouldn't change a single terrifying, beautiful moment of it.